This morning, I'm sorry, I'm not going to be able to stay after service, so I'm just going to take a few seconds now to speak about a couple of things. I have a few pictures over there of relatives who passed during the First World War, and that's a picture of my father in 1946 when he was in Germany. After armistice, and it was done by a German artist while he was there. Tomorrow at Crescent Park Lodge, we are having a medal presented to him from the Embassy of the Netherlands for his time at the liberation of the Netherlands in '46. And that is the medal and the pin of the 65th anniversary of the liberation of the Netherlands. So that's going to be sort of a special day for the family tomorrow. The poem that Once I Held a Poppy was written by my granddaughter, and she won a regional contest for this poem and $50. Once I held a poppy, bright, proud, and red. It amazed me that just a simple flower could represent the dead. I put the poppy next to me as I thought about the war, where soldiers died and families cried, and I didn't know much more. So I learned about the brave people, just like you and me, who gave their lives to save the rest and create a world of harmony. And as I look at the poppy, I feel like I am there, with the bombs and guns and explosions coming from everywhere. The poppy helped me to learn that we can't change the past, but we can remember those who fought for us to make the peacefulness last. She's now in Niagara College. Thank you.
Reading from the New International Version of the Bible, from Ephesians chapter 4, verses 1 through 3. As a prisoner for the Lord, then, I urge you to live a life worthy of the calling you have received. Be completely humble and gentle. Be patient, bearing with one another in love. Make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. This is the word of our Lord.
My uncle Jack Beckett served as a navigator and tail gunner in the Second World War. He earned the nickname Shorty as he stands barely over 5 feet tall. He was shot down over North Africa and spent 4 years as a prisoner of war in various parts of North Africa and Europe. This is a memory of time spent in one of those camps.
Now, it was getting on to September, and not only was it raining quite a bit, but it was starting to get cold at night, and this camp was also right in the pathway for the bombers going to the middle of Germany, and whenever the daylights went over, they would rush us all into the huts, but we'd take the windows out, we'd all hang out through the windows to watch the Americans fly over with their big bombers. You could also see small dots in the sky above them, and the German fighters would attack. And sometimes you could hear the sound of the machine guns firing. And while this was going on, something new happened. Silver stuff started falling all over the camp, and we had no idea what this was until the new POWs told us it was what they called window. And it was used to upset the German radar, and this is pretty new to us. Close by to us was a camp where the Germans trained the the German kids. There was a bunch of them that were wireless operators, and they used to come out in the field next to the camp and sit in the grass with their radio sets and practice their wireless close to their study camp. And we would walk along the wire, and you'd hear them with their Morse code going, and the guys, the wireless operators that were there with our guys would whistle like the sound of the Morse code, and the kids didn't like it. They were just little guys. Geez, they weren't any more than about 12 or 14, it seemed. And sometimes these troop carriers, all tracks on them, would go by, and these little guys would be in the top of them, hanging onto the armor plate as they roared around in the field. They had a big graduation party there, and while the graduation party was on, a mosquito bomber flew low in right up the railroad tracks that went to this camp, and he flew in and bombed the barrack where the celebration was, the graduation was going on. We never heard whether there were any casualties or not, but we could see the smoke after the bombs. Now it's getting on to September, and we were going to need some heat because there was the stove in the hut. It had a big flat steel top on it, and but we didn't have any fuel at all. So the plan was to send work parties out and pull stumps. So I went out on one of these parties, and we had long poles and shovels, and we dug around the stump and then stuck the poles in underneath them and pried them. And in the day, we might get 7 or 8 stumps out. They were mostly spruce, and put them on a 2-wheel cart, and then we pulled them back to the camp. And whoever went out on the work party got themselves a stump. So we would have the stump in our hut at night. You weren't allowed outside at night. We'd have it in the hut at night, and they allowed us to have a hatchet. It wasn't much of a hatchet, but we'd chew it all up in the hut that night and use it for firewood in the stove. Now the stove would run from the 4 o'clock parade till we'd started up until about 7 o'clock, and then it'd be just whatever heat was left there would be no more fire. Now this iron plate was on the top, would get good and hot, and everybody would have their Dixie on there. And there was one guy in the camp, his name was Goebbels, and he was a great chess player. He used to play 6 or 7 guys at a time, and he would come over and put his Dixie on the outside of the iron plate, and it wouldn't be long before he would maneuver and he'd be on the hottest spot. And it didn't matter how often you'd scream at him, and he'd take his pot back, and God, he'd stand there. There was always a crowd around it, the stove, and he'd work his thing back in again. The other thing is there was prunes in the Canadian parcel, and if you put the prunes in a tin can and put them on the stove to boil them, why, you better count your prunes before you put them on there, and count them when you take them off, because sure as the devil, some guy will whip a prune on you.
Reading from the King James Version, Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. And yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever.
We are truly blessed to live in this country, Canada. As you travel around the world and hear the news, we know how lucky we are and how grateful we are. Today we're taking time to remember those that gave their lives in battle. And also today, we are remembering those who were able to return to us at home. We want you to take time to look at the memorial table and the sweatshirts that are there after the service that tells us the story. First on my list is the War of 1812, right here in our area. Those that gave their lives and those that lived to tell the story. Joe Daniels has pictures on the memorial table of members of his family who served in that great war. We will remember them. The First World War, 1914, it went on for 4 long years, called the Great War, the one that was to end all wars. The first Canadian troops arrived in France December 1914, just after the Germans captured Vimy Ridge in October of that year. In the spring of 1917, our Canadian soldiers took back Vimy Ridge. That battle is part of the very fabric of Canada's nationhood. We became a nation because of what our soldiers accomplished. But we also remember that 3,598 were dead out of the 10,602 casualties. The sacrifice these victims of war made on that muddy slopes of Vimy Ridge, where many of our boys still lie buried. After that battle, a member of the Canadian troops that moved in to secure Hill 145 was one of our own, Ernest Stevenson, father of Ken and grandfather of Laurie Bennett. We will remember them. World War II, 1939 to 1945. So many of the men and women who served and those that came home now have passed away, just leaving a few of us widows and sons and daughters to tell their stories. So many of our own congregation served in this war. I can only mention a few. Some who took part here and that did not go overseas also did their part. I'm starting with the Army. Mungo McAllister, husband of Anne and father of Janice Lilly. In 1939, the King called Mungo up to the British Armed Forces, serving with the Gordon Highlanders. They were the first sent off to fight in France. Here his unit was captured, and Mungo was a POW all these years until 1945. Life was hard. As prisoners, they were sent to Poland, made to work in the mines. They were given very little food so that they would batter for extra when they could, and always look forward to supply boxes from the Red Cross. The Red Cross was such a part of World War II. But through all the hardship, Mungo would tell the story, a funny story he'd always tell, about one time the guard took him to the dentist. While Mungo was upstairs with the dentist, the guard got drunk downstairs, ending with Mungo taking the guard back to the base. Anne was still waiting for her sweetheart when the war was over, and we know the rest of the story there. We think of Fran Adams' husband, Lorne, who was only 18, just a boy, when he went off to war. He joined the Royal Canadian Signal Corps, traveling by motorcycle. He went through England, France, the Netherlands, Belgium, and Germany, delivering messages ahead of the troops. It was D-Day +3 when he crossed the English Channel, and he was also assigned to the Armored Brigade and the 4th Division. And there's some T-shirts there and pictures and the map of where he had traveled. Marjorie Morris's Uncle Harold was a sniper, and he too had to go ahead by motorcycle to clear the way for the troops. He was wounded at one time and then became a stretcher bearer. Our own Reverend Sherry's grandfather, Roy Bennett, served in different parts of Europe and was a POW in Italy. Sidney Hessler's husband, Con, taught the soldiers how to drive the trucks and equipment before sending them overseas. Helen Price's father and brother had both served, one in the First World War and the second, and the pictures are there too. Our own late Olive Smith, who sang in our choir, was part of the Canadian service. And Lee Martin and Versa Godfrey, who are still with us and part of this congregation. And there may be many others that I have not had word about, and that we acknowledge them as having served as well. All of those that took part and those that did not return, we will remember them. The Air Force, Lillian Pett's husband, Ed, was a mechanic in the Air Force. He trained in BC and went on to serve in England, India, and Burma, where some of our men were taken POW, in that part of the world too. We often just think about Germany, but all those countries were so involved. Rita Hausman's husband, Ken, was an airman and served in England. We will remember them. The Royal Canadian Navy, we think of Dr. Don Johnson, Peggy's husband. He served as a doctor aboard the Reshtekush, and that ship was helping in the end to bring the Canadians boys home, the troops home after the war. My husband, Ria MacLeod, joined the Navy in 1940. He was a leading seaman. The first ship he was on was a corvette, the Shawinigan. They escorted merchant freighters and troop ships across the North Atlantic. Sometimes when ships went down, they picked up as many survivors as possible, but having to zigzag to avoid the submarines. They would get orders to leave some of them in the water and had to sail away because it became too dangerous. Later, after some of these trips, they returned to Halifax for the Shawinigan to be refitted. Lou and some of the boys went home for a shore leave. While they were gone, the Shawinigan went out with a new crew, and it never came back. It went down with all hands just between Cape Breton and Newfoundland. That was how close the enemy was. We will remember them. Lou was then assigned to the Sherbrooke. That old North Atlantic was cruel in the winter, with ice build-up and trying to dodge the submarines. There were many stories in those 5 years, but not enough time to tell them all. But on this side of the ocean, there were a few good times too, like sail races in Bermuda and treated for dinners and shows in New York City. The Americans really loved the Canadians, especially before the Americans got involved. They treated the Canadians well in New York City if the ship came in there. When the word came of the day of the end of the war, the European War, Lou got the good news while he was still on escorting ships in the middle of the Atlantic. In the summer of 1945, he was refitting the Montreal, preparing to go to Japan. Then the big bomb was dropped. He left the Navy, October 1945. We shall remember them. I want to take a moment just to tell about 3 brothers that I grew up with in Nova Scotia. They came from a big family. 3 brothers joined the Army. The oldest became an MP and stayed in Canada. The second one was wounded, and the third one was just barely 18, and he was killed overseas. And I want to tell you a little story. At one time when I was in Scotland, my husband and I, and we went into Edinburgh Castle in Scotland in 1991. We went into the museum there with the library there with all the names of the Commonwealth that gave their lives in war. And there was a big wall with Canada. And there's books there with all the names, and we said, see if we could find that young man's name, Harold Fraser's name. But as we looked at this wall, we thought, how could we ever find his name among all that? And there was a book open right underneath on the counter, and I picked it up. And there, Harold Fraser, East Pictou, Nova Scotia. God works in mysterious ways. We shall remember those boys. And now we'll go on to Korea. Bowman Trask's brother Don served on the Athabascan ship. It was the first Canadian ship in that conflict. We shall remember those who lost their lives in Korea. In Rwanda, and Bosnia, and Iraq, we shall remember those that gave their lives in service. We come to Afghanistan. The first Canadian woman to die in combat was Captain Nicole Goddard. In honor of all those who died during the Afghan mission, a section of Highway 401 was named Highway of Heroes. 158 Canadian forces have been killed since 2002. Sorry, I'm moving my paper. In 2008, my daughter's girlfriend, Lori Line, here from Niagara Falls, took a leave from her work and went to Afghanistan from June to December 2008 with the Canadian Forces Personal Supply Agency. Their motto was to serve those who served. They ran the Canadian gym and stores in a variety of shops and Tim Hortons. Lori served at the Kandahar and Cape Nathan Smith bases. Her biggest joy was to see the soldiers' faces when they come into places like Tim Hortons. It gave them some sense of normality in a crazy place. Her weirdest memory was on Christmas Eve when she attended a Christian non-denominational service in a Muslim country. And during the worship, the sounds of fighter jets taking off overhead. Cape Nathan Smith's base was only a small one, approximately 200 service members there, so she got to know most of them quite well while there. 3 of the servicemen were killed in just one day while she was there. While in that country, she attended 13 ramp ceremonies. We've saw it all on television. And she stood in line along with the boys as the piper played while our Canadian boys' bodies were put on planes and shipped home to Canada. So sad, she will never forget, but we will remember them. They shall not grow old as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. As the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them.